Well, welcome officially to the webinar. This is the Cresa Hybrid Workforce, How to Affirm and Operationalize Your Strategy. As I mentioned, I'm Jason Jones, Managing Principal and Service Line Leader of Cresa's Hybrid Workforce Services, and I'm joined today by Steve Ike and Paul Springer, Senior Vice Presidents with Cresa. Welcome to the webinar. So there's a workforce trend that's happening right now that's both frightening and exciting. Frightening because it can cause real disruption to any organization, but exciting because of its implications for the health of the economy. And exciting, this is really important, because of the possibilities this represents for organizations who go on the offensive to capitalize on the trend. So I'm going to let the news headlines do the talking. This frightening and exciting trend is, as this headline from a recent Forbes article describes, workers are quitting their jobs in record numbers as the U.S. experiences a booming job market. More headlines in the Wall Street Journal. Forget going back to the office. People are just quitting instead. Bloomberg Wealth. Employees are quitting instead of giving up working from home. Fortune Magazine. Job hopping heats up. 65% of U.S. workers are looking for a new job. And finally, from the New York Times, how do they say economic recovery? I quit. Quoting from the article, with new perspectives, new opportunities, and a different perspective as the pandemic eases, workers are choosing to leave their jobs in record numbers. And here's the proof. This is a chart from the U.S. Labor Department. It shows the number of U.S. workers leaving their jobs as a percentage of total employment. And this ratio is called the quits rate. And quits are voluntary separations of people leaving their jobs. And it's a good barometer of worker confidence in their ability to get another job. A few key numbers for context. The low point on this graph is September 2009, just coming out of the Great Recession when hardly anyone was voluntarily leaving their job. The quits rate was 1.2%. But then, as you can see, and we all remember, the economy began to improve, and the number of people leaving their jobs voluntarily, quitting, increased. But then the pandemic hit, and the quits rate plummeted to 1.5% in April of 2020. However, as we thought we were coming out of the pandemic, at least the first time, 1 year later in April of 2021, the quits rate skyrocketed, a whopping 80% to 2.8%, the highest level since at least 2000. Now in May, it decreased to 2.5%, but then it went back up in June and July to 2.7%. That's the month for which we have the most recent numbers. It comes out a couple of months late. So what can be done about employees quitting, leaving their jobs voluntarily? Well, some organizations are offering raises and bonuses. Some are extending perks, such as free Pelotons and Apple products. Others are taking the time to design engaging office environments. Google is a good example. Google is building and repurposing office spaces to make them more inviting, using ideas like cool outdoor hangouts called teepees for team meetings. And they're really trying to make the office a place where their employees want to go and candidly are willing to make the commute. And finally, many forward-thinking companies are planning flexible, hybrid workforce strategies that leverage both what they learned about remote work over the past year and then combine that with the time-proven benefits of a shared office. Ford Motor Company is a good example. Ford has announced a really progressive hybrid work model for 30,000 of its office-based employees who can, quote, continue to work from home indefinitely and have flexible hours that are approved by their managers. And you got to remember, that's not coming out of Silicon Valley with some of the tech companies. This is a 100-year-old manufacturer in the staid auto industry. And I think that this quote by Kirsten Robinson of Ford is both insightful and humble. She says, if there's one thing that we've learned over the last 12 months, It's that a lot of our assumptions around work and what employees need has shifted. So the question most organizations are asking in light of this is, if a hybrid workforce strategy can help recruit and retain the best and the brightest, then what should be the balance for my organization between remote and the office? In other words, what is the right hybrid blend? And then, once we've decided what that blend is, how do we put it into practice fairly, equitably, and without opening ourselves up to any blind spots that we didn't think of in advance? Well, clearly, you need a plan. You need a plan to affirm and operationalize your workforce strategy. But every plan is going to be unique to every organization and likely unique to each department within an organization. Many business leaders feel like the person on this screen. There's just so many paths to choose from, so many variables to consider, both known and unknown. Many organizations feel stuck right now, and they're struggling to build consensus on a path forward. So, if you're interested in answering questions like, well, what is the right blend for our organization? And what are the criteria for a successful hybrid workforce strategy? What's a roadmap to navigate to the right blend of remote and office? And then finally, how do we operationalize our strategy and put it into action? Then this is the webinar for you. As I mentioned, I'm Jason Jones. I'm joined today by my colleagues, Steve Ike and Paul Springer. I've been at Cresa for 18 years, originally as a real estate advisor, but now I exclusively lead two of our service lines, Cresa Business Technology Sourcing and Hybrid Workforce Services, the topic of today's webinar. Steve and Paul both have over 25 years of experience providing human resources, operations, and technology experience to companies like General Electric, Macy's, Procter & Gamble, Kimberly-Clark, just to name a few. So today, we'll have a 50-minute presentation with some Q&A at the end. We'll record the webinar, as I mentioned earlier, and send out a copy afterwards. Please ask questions via the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen. You can hover over the icon, the bar down there, and it'll pop up Q&A. And enter in a question at any time throughout the through the webinar. Don't just wait till the very end when we will have the Q&A session. Please, if you have a comment or a question, something you didn't quite understand, go ahead and log it in. We love these questions, and we will get to all of them at the end of the webinar. So today we're going to address, number one, context for where we are in the timeline of the COVID-19 experience from a work perspective, the benefits and challenges of a hybrid workforce strategy, its key elements, and a roadmap to affirm and operationalize your hybrid workforce strategy. So, excuse me, we start with context for the timeline of the pandemic. Phase one was the immediate phase. Overnight, people were forced to work from home. Phase two is the endure phase, and we continue to endure, leveraging technology, modifying workflows, and maintaining our culture. Phase three will be the post-COVID phase, and this is the sustain and compete phase. Organizations will now strive to sustain a new way of working that leverages both what they learned about remote work while recapturing all the benefits of a shared central office. But to get from phase two to phase three, we have to go through a transition. And that is where we are right now. But before leaders can move forward with a specific transition plan, they've got to ask themselves a key question. This is a question that addresses the powerful workforce desire for the freedom to choose where and when they work. And this key question is one that we suggest that you too ask yourself. And that question is, what is the right hybrid workforce strategy specific to us that will, number one, be reflective of our culture, but also minimize expenses, minimize the threat to business continuity, while at the same time maximize productivity, talent attraction and retention, and financial results. So you see, it's these three key business drivers that inform our planning process for a hybrid strategy and its implementation. But in order to evaluate different strategies, we have to start by understanding the benefits and the challenges of these different strategies so we can compare them to each other and then make the right decision about the blend. So let's take a look. The benefits of a hybrid workforce strategy, again, combine the best of remote work and the best of the shared office. Now, for just a moment, I want to pause and make a quick point about bias. It may seem elementary to review the benefits and challenges because most of these we've already know. We've experienced the benefits and the challenges of both. However, it's important that when you begin your planning process to collectively agree as a leadership team what the benefits are of both options. Because each person brings their own bias to the planning process, and there's a tendency to lift up the positives and downplay the negatives of the workforce strategy that they like best or least, as the case may be. So in order to foster objectivity and ensure your organization remains open-minded, start your planning process with a dialogue about what are the benefits, what are the challenges of both of the extreme strategies, office and remote. Now, at the top of the list for the benefits for remote working is reduced commute and fewer interruptions. These, of course, increase productivity. Other potential benefits are the reduced expense of real estate, employee turnover, absenteeism, and the personal costs associated with reduced commute, reduced expense on clothes and food. There are environmental benefits, and employees consistently state their work-life balance is better. Now, on the other hand, the benefits of the office are time proven, and they've really crystallized during the pandemic. Highlights on the screen include things that typically occur best in person, such as mentoring and serendipitous moments. Now, one benefit of both remote work and the shared office is the ability to recruit and retain talent. Multiple surveys show that at least 70% of employees want some type of hybrid workforce experience, okay, some type of blend. And therefore, organizations will have to offer a degree of flexibility between home and the office in order to recruit and retain the best and the brightest. So really, it's the hybrid is the only one that shares the benefit of recruiting and retaining talent in the broadest sense. However, even with all these benefits of a hybrid workforce environment, there are several challenges to plan for. And we're going to highlight just 3 scenarios that organizations could be faced with in a post-COVID hybrid workforce environment. And the first challenge is the potential for disparity between teams. Let's take Team A, for instance. Team A has a manager who embraces a hybrid workforce. She is on board with the concept of giving you the freedom to choose where and when you feel you can be the most productive. Periodically, she requires in-person meetings, but they're purposeful and well-run. She focuses on the output of your efforts, not the input of your time. Team members feel a strong spirit of freedom working for her. Then there's Team B. Team B is a manager who doubts the long-term effectiveness of a hybrid workforce. He's uncomfortable managing people he cannot see and requires in-office presence, although he does allow remote work 1 day of the week. When Team B looks at Team A, they feel constrained. So what is the outcome? Team B feels jealous and dispirited. They wonder, can I switch teams? Or worse, should I leave my job? Now, another challenge is internal division within a hybrid team. And in this scenario, we have in-office team members who are either full-time or majority in office. Then we have remote team members that are either full-time or majority remote. If the boss spends most of her time in the office, then in-office team members have proximity to her that remote team members do not. This proximity may lead to real or perceived better career opportunities, choice assignments, promotions, etc., and better access to information. What's the upshot of this scenario? Remote team members feel undervalued and dispirited. Teamwork is reduced, and they wonder, can I switch teams? Or again, should I leave this organization? Yet another challenge, our third challenge of a hybrid workforce, regards how to accommodate multiple employee profiles. And by profiles, we mean how and when employees choose to work. For example, profile number 1 are employees who choose to work 3 days in the office and 2 days at home, or perhaps the other way around. Profile number 2 are in the office 100% of the time, but there's a cultural acceptance and understanding that if they take an afternoon or a day to work from remotely, it's no big deal. And then profile number 3's default location is at home, but they attend periodic in-person team meetings and occasionally choose to drop in the office to work or to socialize. The challenge is, how do you accommodate all of these profiles at the same time? What are the critical requirements of the organization, the organizational infrastructure that supports them? Now, this next slide is really key to understanding and awareness of what it takes to support a hybrid workforce. What should organizations do from the perspective of human resource policy, measuring performance, ongoing training, cultural norms, technology, cybersecurity, and developing a real estate strategy that will support each of these profiles at the same time? Should you even allow all of these profiles at the same time? Is it any wonder, any surprise why many organizations feel stuck in their planning right now? So those were 3 challenging scenarios, but here are some of the top challenges that result from those scenarios. You'll see on a list develop on the screen, and these looming issues showcase the need for organizations to invest time right now, preparing for the future, building consensus, casting a vision to their employees, and ultimately creating a strategy that not only addresses these challenges, but also, and this is going on the offensive, leveraging the benefits of the hybrid working model to maximize productivity, recruiting and retaining talent, and financial results. So Cresa has developed a conceptual framework and practical roadmaps to tie all of these components of hybrid working together into a cohesive strategy, which they can then be used to operationalize the strategy. So the first key framework is a concept that we call be sequential to be successful. And this gets you headed down the right path, and it all starts at the top. We believe the 2 most important elements of success are leadership and culture. They are the umbrella which overhangs all success. Then, the fundamental business goals of operational productivity, recruiting and retaining talent, and maximizing financial results inform all decisions and drive behavior. But to support these business goals, you must follow a sequential path, starting with workforce strategy, followed by workplace strategy and design, and then real estate strategy. Too often companies skip the human component of the workforce strategy and they go straight to step 2 or step 3. So here it is again. Step 1 drives step 2, which leads naturally to step 3. Be sequential to be successful. And when workforce strategy is addressed first like this, ultimately what that does is it gives you the freedom to design your workplace with the confidence that you're basing the design and the real estate strategy on meaningful information. You want to build your workplace design and real estate strategy on solid rock, not shifting sand. So with that in mind, we're going to focus on 5 steps to affirm and operationalize your workforce strategy. And the process is best thought about in 2 phases. Phase 1 is determine and affirm the strategy. Phase 2 is to operationalize the strategy. Now, step 1, determine and affirm, that's easy to say, but it's much harder to do. Even those of you who have already determined what your strategy may be, you may feel compelled to reassess the key building blocks of your strategy in light of what you learned today. Now, at a high level, you'll need to decide whether the strategy is fully remote, fully office, or a hybrid blend of the 2. But at this step, you're also going to decide whether this is an organization-wide mandate, sort of a one-size-fits-all, or will it be left to the discretion of departmental leaders or team leaders to make these decisions? In fact, that's the question. Who is ultimately going to be making the decision? At what level? Now, once you've made those decisions, You can move on to phase 2 to operationalize your strategy. But this first step is actually quite complex. So we're going to walk you through a roadmap for making this decision in a manner that contemplates and aligns all of the key departments of your organization. And those key departments are listed here: human resources, information technology, finance, etc. Each of them will make unique contributions to the collective success of the strategy. So in order to implement a sustainable hybrid strategy, you've got to ensure that each department is aligned with the others to create the integrated organizational structure that supports the strategy. And part of your due diligence is to uncover, okay, well, what are the gaps for each department? Where do we need to do some work to fill in those gaps, and how can they be filled? And by the way, this is what the top talent is looking for. When they consider joining your organization, or on the other hand, when they contemplate, should I stay in this organization? They want to know, number one, what is the strategy and its guidelines? That seems natural. But also number two, a little step further, is they want assurance that the organizational infrastructure is in place to support the strategy and their success, no matter where they work. So this slide shows the critical requirements of each department necessary to support the strategy. Now, this is the checklist that every organization should work through. You'll see it building on the screen. And at Cresa, we help our clients evaluate all of these requirements in a really thoughtful and methodical manner. And we believe that this is a key differentiator for our firm. We don't know of anyone else who starts their real estate strategy by evaluating the critical requirements of an upstream workforce strategy. We will send an email out to everyone who has attended the webinar today, so there's no need to jot all these down right now. We just wanted to show them to you. And but we are going to go through a few of them in detail during the webinar. But if you'd like to have a conversation about your organization, just a deeper dive, something about your specific situation, please contact us. You'll have our contact information at the end of the webinar, or the Cresa advisor who invited you to this webinar, and they can put you in touch with us and answer questions themselves. So to go into a little bit more detail of the human resource critical requirements, I want to introduce my colleague, Paul Springer. Paul is our human resource and operations subject matter expert, hands down. He has over 25 years of experience integrating HR, operations, IT, and real estate. So Paul, I turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Jason. So as you're thinking about this, one of the most important departments in a hybrid workforce strategy is human resources. As Jason shared, I've been doing human resources and operations for 25 years. And I'm going to be sharing with you a few of the critical requirements for HR to effectively support hybrid work, and I want to start with job roles. Interestingly, although many organizations went to 100% remote during the pandemic, that doesn't necessarily mean that moving forward, all suitable roles can be done effectively working from home. Many roles can be done remotely, but the better question is, should they be done remotely? In order to achieve the highest productivity, you really need to consider and determine if a role has dependencies or requires in-person collaboration and resources in the office. Additionally, related to personal aptitude, even if roles are suitable for remote work, the job processes need to have a clear alignment with a hybrid workforce strategy. This could mean automation of paper-based processes, digitizing the files, reviewing systems, or understanding how to best collaborate and those tools that enable you to do that a little bit better. That leads to training for managers and employees. Managers may benefit from training to better manage a dispersed team that includes both people at home and in the office at any given time. In addition, the technology that enables remote work is constantly changing, and many employees don't even have a full understanding of the suite of technology available to them at their organizations. Another component to this strategy is eligibility, and more specifically, ensuring transparent and equitable criteria and eligibility guidelines. This should be memorialized and communicated clearly to increase transparency in the organization. That's imperative. Lastly, a key component of this strategy is the employee handbook. Many businesses only focus on the hybrid or or remote work policy and procedure. However, with a dispersed team, the entire employee handbook requires a detailed review and update to ensure policies are written to align with a remote and in-office audience. In addition, we recommend the use of the intranet or other automated communication platforms to enable employees to easily access and clearly understand the employee handbook no matter where their work location is. And speaking of hybrid workforce policies, these policies should address a number of different components. That includes eligibility requirements, tools and resources the company will provide for home use, which could be different from in the office, what the employee is expected to provide, meaning basic standards for internet, a clean and quiet place to work, and then expectations for personal performance and participation. Lastly, another item is what constitutes disqualification. And a clear policy is crucial to setting expectations. And as a leader, if you don't set expectations, your employees will set their own, and they'll likely be different from yours. With that, I'd like to turn this over to Steve Ike for a deeper dive into technology. As we shared earlier, Steve Ike has over 25 years of experience providing workforce strategy consulting to several large, successful global businesses. Steve, I hand it over to you.
Thank you, Paul. As we step into both technology and technology as it impacts operations, I think setting the kind of ground rule that technology, it's really more than platforms and tools. It's a resource enabler that can be leveraged to create a connected and collaborative enterprise. As we look at how, when, and where people work, whether in office or remote or a combination of these, communications and collaboration platforms are the foundation for personal interaction. Through real-time and near real-time communications, the platforms are used for anytime and anywhere one number reach across multiple devices that, when combined with a shared workspace where you can meet, collaborate, and share ideas, provides for that connected enterprise. So Jason, if you can build through the first point and on to the second. So with performance management, this is focusing on something that Jason spoke of earlier, of managing productivity and outcomes versus activity. And this aids in three key focus areas in that hybrid strategy. First, we have to build trust. Then we empower our employees and focus on driving results versus measuring tasks. It addresses the if I can't see, I can't manage, and evolves to if I can measure, I can manage. So performance management is both a process and a set of tools that organizations use to measure and manage corporate performance, employee performance, and team performance. And through visualization of this information, it helps managers have meaningful conversations with their employees with providing real-time access to that information in the dashboard. And ultimately, this in turn helps address the issues faced with the in-office and remote tension. And most importantly, what Paul mentioned is consistency in communications and measuring productivity, progress towards goals, and driving those business outcomes. So we step into document management. We think of tools like Box, Dropbox, Google Drive, SharePoint, and those. It's not only these online storage libraries, but we want to be able to combine this with management tools, which can be utilized to manage the content, address security, who's the owner of that document, the version of that document, and the distribution of these documents and files. It facilitates real-time and anytime access and addresses process, workflows, and document control. So folks, as we think about this, this can be a loan process in financial services, claims management for insurance, CRM and sales activities, and then financial, HR, marketing, and operations for general business. And finally, as we step into cybersecurity and compliance, this is often the most overlooked and underanalyzed area for remote work. We talk about corporate security and document protection inside of the office, but as we look at remote, with more people working from home, more connected devices, and multiple people working in the same area, it offers that opportunity for others to gain access to critical and secure corporate information. There are technical considerations like separate wireless networks, secure connectivity, and intrusion detection, but we also take a look at the human factors, which are human error and threats from within, intentional and accidental. And mentioned on the screen is policy and compliance, communicating out to everyone what is our corporate policy on good behaviors and their training for that. So when we look at the physical logistics, the human factors, and the technical considerations, the remote workforce needs to really be addressed and communicated out through training and employee responsibility. And some key things to think about: keeping our work area separate from our personal activity area, and then having a documented IT security policy that addresses everything from bring your own device to phishing attacks and human behaviors to the appropriate web activity for the remote worker. So Jason, I'll hand back off to you to kind of move to the next section.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. So the one more key component that we'll cover today is real estate that supports the people, the physical space that employees occupy. But the concept of office space has really changed dramatically because of the pandemic. And to accommodate this and desire for freedom of choice in where and when they work, organizations must view the workplace as a network of flexible, convenient, and on-demand places. You see, employees want the option to choose a workplace location where they feel they will be most productive that day, or even just part of the day, which means freedom of movement is really going to be important, whether between workplaces, home, office, other, or even inside of the workplace itself. Now, at the same time, in order to really make this effective, leaders must be purposeful. It's a key word that you'll continue to hear when talking to us at Cresa. We're all about purposeful collaboration. And what we mean by that is you're being purposeful about the frequency of collaboration, how often you schedule meetings or send emails or have voice conferences, etc., but also the medium of that collaboration, whether it's virtual, and there's different mediums to communicate and collaborate virtually, or in-person collaboration. See, team leaders need to be intentional about when to use the medium of digital tools, such as video conference, collaboration software like Slack, Microsoft Teams, etc., versus using the medium of the physical office for collaboration. They must be intentional about how they use these tools, ensuring that people who are working remotely on any given day are actively included in the in-person meetings and not at a disadvantage to the people who are actually in the office. Leaders will need to model the behavior that they want to see from their employees. That's a key component of leadership. And they'll need to make efforts to be organized, prepared, and intentional about how to make the best use of everyone's time, how to be equitable and inclusive, and how to build a culture, ultimately, of purposeful collaboration. So to make it easy to visualize the steps to affirm and operationalize your strategy, we developed a roadmap to guide you through both phases of the process. And this is a core part of our workforce strategy consulting, which starts with phase one, which is ultimately step one, is to affirm the strategy. This is to clearly state whether your organization is fully office, fully remote, or some degree of a hybrid blend, and whether or not it's an organization-wide mandate, or to what degree it's going to be delegated down to lower levels. We always begin with a vision and goals session, where you're going to build your project team, establish the goals for the project, and set a timeline. Next, you go through the process of discovery, which is conducting interviews, internal interviews among both senior leaders, but also maybe focus groups for teams of people. You can do surveys, but you're gathering information about the critical requirements of each department in the organization, and then analyze. That's step 1C. analyze by developing strategy, ensuring departmental alignment, and determine the appropriate solutions. This phase ultimately ends with the internal affirmation of the hybrid workforce strategy. Now, phase 2 is the subject of the rest of the webinar, and it encompasses steps 2 through 5 to operationalize the very strategy that you've chosen. So let's talk about the step 2, criteria and guidelines. And by criteria and guidelines, we mean the specifics around when people will be working in the office versus when they'll be working remotely. And examples would include X number of days of the week in the office, or perhaps instead it's X% of the time in the office, which provides a little bit more flexibility. You don't have to be there all day, just you're looking for a certain percentage, 50% of the time or 25% of the time, either at home or in the office. And then there's going to be variations for different employees based on their job or travel requirements, as opposed to a blanket policy. Now, we also recommend that you consider categorizing each employee to help communicate the plan throughout your workforce with transparency and equity. Next, you'll need to memorialize the plan. And this is important for a communication standpoint, right? This not only means putting the plan in writing, but it also means documenting specific human resource policies, updating job descriptions and job contracts, and of course, creating the dynamic schedules that detail where and when employees will be working so we know where everyone is, so we can coordinate the collaboration that we're trying to achieve. So after clear documentation, you'll need to prepare a very clear communication and change management plan. So it's critical that you anticipate the effect of your strategy on culture and operations. Preparing a 12-month communication playbook will put you in position to manage the change smoothly. Things to include in the playbook are a roadmap of key milestones, a plan for which communication vehicles that you're going to utilize. Examples would be using Slack, company newsletters, town halls, etc. And it's really helpful to have sort of a mini library of pre-planned internal messaging, which accounts for expected outcomes and perhaps some contingencies that may happen along the way. This was going to help you avoid being caught flat-footed in the coming months. And then finally, as with any major change, such as a new workforce strategy, you should assess, recalibrate, and ultimately evolve over time. You should review your strategy every 3 months after the initial rollout in order to ensure continuous improvement and that the strategy continues to be aligned with the organization's mission. Allow your organization to experiment with new ideas. Solicit feedback along the way. That's a really important part of learning and then modifying, learning and then reacting. And you want to make sure that you're making the changes so that you're accomplishing ultimately the objectives of recruiting and retaining talent, maximizing productivity, and maximizing financial results. So, do you remember at the beginning of the webinar when we talked about inherent bias that everyone brings for either working remotely or working in the office? Well, this bias, it can really sway the outcome of your planning. So, especially, I'll add one thing, if there's some either very influential people or very strong voices pushing what it is that they feel is best. What we do to help even that out across the organization is we help our clients bridge this gap between the differing opinions and ensure that a potentially subjective process remains an objective process as much as possible. So Cresa offers our clients 3 levels of consulting as they navigate their hybrid workforce roadmap. And Tier 1 is focused on operationalizing a strategy that's really already been decided by the client. So what we do is we review previous discovery activities, and then we use that information to align all the departments and operationalize the strategy. That's Tier 1. Tier 2, we spend a little more time helping our clients with the discovery and the collaboration among key leaders of the organization. We'll conduct stakeholder interviews, focus sessions and surveys, and then help operationalize the strategy that the organization determines. Tier 3, very similar to Tier 2, but it takes an even deeper dive and a broader dive, interviewing more people, doing more focus sessions, et cetera, in the course of the discovery process. And then, of course, modifying these, we can modify these tier levels as necessary, depending on the needs of the organization. We're very collaborative with our clients. Sample deliverables from our consulting engagements include what it is you see on the screen: executive summary, updated hybrid workforce policies, sample work agreements, a communications plan, job descriptions, a decision matrix to help make the decision about which strategy you want to pursue, and then sample employee letters and other letters to the employees, perhaps thanking them for participating in company surveys. So with that, let me offer a summary, and then we'll get to some Q&A. Number one, the desire for freedom is changing where and when we work. As important as a shared central office is, this desire for freedom of choice requires that most organizations develop a hybrid workforce strategy, unique to them, their culture, and their business needs. And to get there, transition is key. How you transition to your new hybrid work environment will determine how competitive you will be in this new environment. And it will determine how competitive you will be regarding attracting and retaining talent and competing with other organizations in the marketplace. And then finally, be sequential to be successful. This is really important. Don't skip steps. Before you operationalize the strategy, be sure that your organizational structure can support the strategy and sustain it. Build your plan on solid information gathered from all departments of your organization to ensure alignment and preparedness. Then follow through on all the steps for implementation. That way you're going to be in a much better position to evaluate ongoing feedback and make those continuous improvements so that, again, you can maximize productivity, recruit and retain talent, and maximize financial results. Now, there's one last thought that we want to leave you with. I was in the Navy for 8 years, flying jets off aircraft carriers. So I know that the Navy is an organization that runs on planning, training, and leadership, especially leadership. Similarly, implementing corporate programs that involve significant change requires the same 3 elements. But planning and training, they don't happen without leadership. This is a time that calls for leaders to determine the right workforce strategy and then to operationalize it. So be thoughtful in your planning, train your people, but most importantly, be the leader who seizes this opportunity for a new and more advantageous workforce strategy. Now, that's the end of our webinar, our regularly scheduled program, as they say. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to move to the Q&A session now, but I wanted to pause just briefly so that people could see our email addresses. If there's something that you saw and you wanted more information on, if there are a scenario or situation that you want to talk through, we talk to a lot of organizations all over the US and Canada on a very consistent basis and have for many months. So we've seen a lot of different concepts and different things that people are trying. So we'd love to have those conversations with you as well. But we'll go ahead and move to the Q&A feature. Stand by and let me pull that up. I'll stop sharing my screen. And the first question that I want to go to, actually, I think this is a good question for Paul, which is, how do we create a hybrid workforce policy that meets the needs of both employees and the company? So that makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of tension, right, between employees and managers, so to speak. How do you create a policy that that accommodates both?
So It's an easy answer, but harder to do. It sounds obvious, but as you were talking about in the affirmation kind of step of the work that we do in our consulting, what you need to really go through is a process where you're collecting the feedback from the employees and from the leadership. So many times organizations will have a few operational leaders focus on this process, maybe a head of HR, maybe an operational lead, maybe a CFO, and may or may not get the feedback from employees. And so in order to ensure that you're rolling out a policy that meets the needs of both, you need to go through a little bit of an extra step in collecting some additional feedback, maybe through a survey, maybe through focus groups or other means, to get that feedback from the employees, and also triangulate that with the leadership and future strategy to ensure that anything you're implementing moving forward is aligned with the culture and the needs of both. You're not going to make everyone happy, but you'll do your best in aligning everyone as much as you can.
Yeah. Yep. Makes perfect sense. Steve, anything you wanted to add to that, or there's a couple more questions that are coming in?
Yeah, I think we can get to the extra questions and then maybe circle back.
Okay. All right. So the next question coming in is, it's really nice. Thank you for putting together this webinar. Do you have any best practices or strategies for companies who are interested in testing a hybrid strategy prior to actually affirming a plan? So this is around any best practices for giving something a test drive prior to committing to something.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll leave that open to either of my experts. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I'll give Paul a rest on, and he will have quite a bit to add to this, but there's a couple things that we do think about. And the most obvious is don't try and eat the elephant all in one sitting. Start with a pilot group. Determine what is the most appropriate group that has interdependencies between teams, and establish a pilot plan for that group, and evaluate things from what are the workflows, how do they work in and between teams, what are the tools that they need to work effectively remotely, what are the tools that we can use to monitor productivity, and once we do that, look at the job roles and responsibilities and go back to what Paul said is, are they appropriate for remote work? Great news is we've been in an 18-month sea trial. We got thrown right into it. We went out and addressed that. But with that pilot, you want to set your objectives and your goals. You want to set your measurement for that. You evaluate and then reconsider, and then launch out to the broader audience.
I'm curious, Paul, tell me what your thoughts on this.
So, I agree with everything that Steve said. The piece that I would add is, and you'll hear me use these words a lot, and I think you use them a bit in the presentation as well, is consistency, equity, and transparency, and specifically transparency in this case, because you want to make sure that you're honest and transparent with the employees about what you're doing. You want to make sure that if you're doing that pilot group like Steve was talking about, and you're really trying to test some things out, that you're honest with the employees and you let them know that's what you're doing. You collect feedback from them along the way, kind of like I was talking about in the previous question, to ensure that as you're doing that, they understand this is not the set policy. This is going to be reassessed. This is going to, all the different recommendations you've made throughout this presentation include that. Bring the employees along, be people focused, and make sure that they know what you're doing. As in addition to everything Steve said as well.
So I thought it was interesting that Steve, you mentioned, I think a key thing, a best practice, and this is what this person is looking for, is pick a group that has interdependencies, or a couple of different parts of the organization that have interdependencies, to really see how that's going to work as they're back and forth in a hybrid model. Mm-hmm. So I think that's interesting. To me, this is a softball question and I hate to say it, but it is a plug for our process. I think it's really important. If you're going to do a pilot program, you need to build consensus around what that pilot program looks like from a multidisciplinary leadership perspective. You need to have the insights of human resources, IT, finance, marketing, et cetera, because each of those departments have, particularly human resources and information technology, they're going to have a dramatic effect on the success of any hybrid workforce plan. So you really need to make sure, as a best practice, before you do a pilot, you need to make sure you're talking to HR and IT and other departments so that you can see where the gaps are in supporting the hybrid strategy. Many organizations, things have been working as we've been working remotely, but to some degree, it's kind of holding things together with bubble gum and bread ties, right? There's a big opportunity for optimizing in these environments, optimizing human resource policies, optimizing the information technology that supports working remotely or hybrid working. And I would say that's a best practice, is making sure you're talking to those leaders before you launch that pilot plan.
And get feedback from your teams and your employees about how they work and how they work best, so that the employees are involved in that conversation, then they're invested in the conversation as well.
Yeah. Okay, very good. Okay, so we'll move on to the next question. What do you wish more companies knew about flexible work? Any thoughts?
So I'll jump in on this one.
Yeah.
We shared earlier in the presentation the slide that built out with all the critical requirements, and one thing that I really would prefer that companies knew a little bit more about is all the different components that go into really doing an effective and implementing an effective hybrid workforce strategy. Some companies are only focusing on the policy, focusing on some components, but in order to do it right, you really need to ensure that you're focusing on all those different areas. In addition, there's some other kind of gotcha areas that you want to make sure that you're proactively prepared for. If you're going to have a dispersed team, there's things like job descriptions, like networks for different benefits, for employment agreements, other things that you need to consider that and kind of look at that through a lens of a dispersed team, because what may work in your headquarters in Maryland or Virginia may not work for a dispersed team all around the country, or maybe even all around the world. So you really need to focus on those operational areas and those critical requirements to make sure that you're doing this holistically and not just one small component of it.
Very well. So I brought that slide back up to really point out, I believe this is what you're pointing to, right, Paul, is
Yep.
It's important for organizations to know if you're going down the path of flexible workspace. Again, we're back to, do you have the organizational infrastructure, I'll call it, in place that can support that strategy? Do you have the right IT? Do you have the right human resource policies? Are your operational processes and workflows, have you really thought about what this is going to be like? And then as you test that pilot program, you need to be looking for that, monitoring. Do we need more training? Where do we need training? Things like that. So I agree that it would be helpful for, and this is part of what we do, is we inform and we really dive into these topics as we have those conversations with senior leaders to make sure that we're covering all this, to put them in the best position possible for success.
Yeah, and Jason, with that, remote and hybrid work is not new. I was sharing with someone the other day that I actually had my first remote work experience in 1996. So I just dated myself a little bit, but it was actually here in Atlanta due to the Olympics. And we were one of the technology providers to the Olympics. So we were focusing on helping them and working with them. But all of a sudden, when everything came to the expectation that Atlanta was going to be in a standstill, we found out that it's possible. And at that time, we kind of evolved around people, process, and technology. But over the evolution of hybrid workforce, we got to that point where 20 to 25% of the workforce was working effectively remote. But we learned the human factor side given the last 18 months.
Yeah.
With trust, with empowerment, with communication, with listening. We took care of, before the building blocks of hybrid remote work. Now we really learned how to take care of the people side of a hybrid work environment.
Gotcha. Okay, very well. So we're right at the top of the hour. Any final comments before we sign off? Paul, I'll give you an opportunity first, and Steve just spoke. Any thoughts that you wanted to share, and then we'll end the webinar.
Just one final, I think I covered a lot, but if you do have my contact information, if you have questions as it relates to human resources and operations linked to the hybrid workforce strategy, I'd love to talk to you.
Very well. And Steve?
No, perfect. Just to reiterate, we are available for one-on-one conversations, and reach out to any one of our team. It's where we really kind of just peel back the next layer of a hybrid workforce and optimized strategy.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun. We've talked to a whole bunch of organizations. We're working with several right now, and there's a lot of neat ideas out there. So thank you very much to everyone. You'll get a copy of the webinar, the recording, as well as the slides. And please reach out to the advisor who invited you here, if not to us. And we hope that you have a great day. Thank you once again.
That's all.
All right, thank you.
Bye-bye.